everybody, and welcome back to IT Project Management. In this module, we will be taking another look at project scope management from a waterfall and an agile perspective. Let's take a look at our learning goals. By the end of this module, you should be able to describe the difference between a requirement and a user story, to describe the difference between the ways in which waterfall and agile methodologies develop and manage project scope. You should also be able to explain how the project change request process exists to avoid scope creep in waterfall projects, and to explain how project change requests are not needed in an agile context. So let's take a look at our waterfall chart that shows where we are in the project development process. Now that the project charter is complete, we need to start getting the details of what, when, how much, and who hammered out. To do so, we need to break all the work that is going into our project down into a to-do list that is as precise as possible so that we can avoid any errors and build exactly what our customer wants and make sure that all users can and want to use what we have built. To reach that kind of measurable organizational value, we need to start managing our project scope. If our organization requires that we manage our project in a waterfall fashion, we will now start building the scope statement, which culminates in a long technical requirements document that is framed by how we are supposed to be managing the project itself. That latter part is called the project requirements. If our organization employs an agile framework and the project vision and mission are complete, we can start writing user stories, which describe how our users experience our product and derive from them use cases that describe user actions with their technical functionality requirements. These user stories and often use cases are collected in the product backlog, which looks very similar to a technical requirements document. Let's first take a look at our waterfall method. As you can see here, project scope, here shown in the blue box, encompasses both the management tasks and the technical tasks. Most of the tasks, such as planning scope management, collecting requirements, all the way down to creating the work breakdown structure, about which we will talk in a moment, occur in the project planning phase, shown in the round rectangle on the left side here. The outputs include, among other things, a deliverable definition table, which lists all the project deliverables that include the product itself and all the other deliverables that will make our project successful. These are, for example, user documentation, help desk scripts, user training manuals, and lab setups, and that to-do list that tells us which tasks need to be completed to ensure the project has a successful outcome. That is the work breakdown structure. Of course, when we are implementing all our technical steps 2 or 3 months down the road, we have to always check that we have followed all the instructions and requirements. That is called validate scope and happens in the monitoring and controlling phase along with the control scope task. Remember the importance of change requests that come in so handy when you're asked to change what and how much the project is working on. That's where the change requests are being collected and analyzed, and sometimes the project sponsor will approve them, and sometimes not. All of these tasks are the management tasks for the project. They guide how successful you will be in providing measurable organizational value by completing the product scope in the software development lifecycle, the SDLC. That's what we're seeing in the lower half of this graphic. The product scope is essentially technical in nature and includes the functional and technical requirements and the most important diagrams, such as the context diagram, in which we will see the data flows that connect our product with external applications and within its own modules, and one or usually many use case diagrams that show the tasks that our user needs to perform on our product. Just as we are validating, that is checking that we have completed all items of the project scope in the monitoring and controlling phase, we must test that all the features that we have designed and built work as intended. That happens when we do scope verification. The scope verification cross-reference matrix that you're seeing in the lower right-hand corner here helps us keep track of all the requirements and use cases and asks our test engineers to execute each use case and exercise our implementation of each requirement to make sure that we have built a quality piece of software. That is how scope management works in a waterfall context. Remember that waterfall truly means that requirements don't change unless they are authorized to. That happens through scope change control. Agile scope management is different from scope management in a traditional project. As we have just seen, product scope is all the features and requirements that a product includes. Project scope is all the work involved in creating a product. So it really is a bottom-up process. Changing requirements in a waterfall context is often seen as a sign of failure in upfront planning or in controlling the boundaries of project scope. In contrast, Agile uses a top-down approach to defining and estimating scope in order to eliminate the waste, that is the time and the money, of spending many weeks defining requirement details that may never be implemented or that may be outdated by the time the team is ready to build the feature. This means that Agile projects have a more flexible definition of scope so that project teams can immediately and incrementally incorporate learning and feedback and ultimately create better products. Go ahead and pause this video to take a good look at these 4 points from the Agile Manifesto. Then come back. The signers of the Agile Manifesto recognized that scope change is natural and beneficial. Agile approaches specifically embrace change and use it to make better informed decisions and more useful products. So, don't these points sound good? We welcome changing requirements. We deliver what we can with what we know about the product at the present time. And indeed, at any point in an Agile project, anyone, the Scrum team, stakeholders, or anyone else in the organization with a good idea can identify new product requirements. The product owner determines the value and priority of new requirements and prioritizes those requirements against other requirements in the product backlog. During sprint planning at the beginning of each sprint, the Scrum team can use the product backlog priority to help decide whether a new requirement should be part of the sprint. Lower priority requirements stay in the product backlog for future consideration. So as this graphic shows here, Agile turns the triple constraint triangle of scope, time, and money that we have in waterfall scope management on its head. In waterfall project management, we start with a fixed scope right here, and we derive the schedule and budget estimates from it. In Agile, we start with a fixed time period for a project or a release, and often a fixed budget, and then we pack as many features into the release as time and money will allow. So how does Agile scope management work on a practical level? Rather than developing a scope statement that is broken down into a list of detailed and sponsor-approved requirements, an Agile product owner maintains a product backlog that contains a prioritized list of desired functionality. This functionality is usually described in user stories. User stories describe in detail what each user needs to be able to do with the product or service we're delivering in order to achieve a purpose that generates value for her. Take a look at the user story structure in this box here in the upper left-hand corner. Do you see how it has a very specific grammar? Let's break this down. As a persona. This makes us ask, who are we building this for? We're not just after a job title, we're after the persona of the person. Let's call him Max. Our team should have a shared understanding of who Max is. We've hopefully interviewed plenty of Maxes. We understand how Max works, how he thinks, and what he feels. We have empathy for Max. Wants to. Here we're describing Max's intent, not the features he uses. What is it that Max is actually trying to achieve? Note that this statement is implementation free. If you're describing any part of the UI and not what Max's goal is, you're missing the point. So that we're asking here, how does Max's immediate desire to do something fit into the bigger picture of his work? What is the overall benefit that he is trying to achieve? What is the big problem that Max needs to solve? To ensure that the most important user stories are built first, the product owner ranks all the stories repeatedly, and the highest ranking ones usually make it into the planning meeting for a sprint. During the sprint or iteration planning meeting, the team decides which ones of the high priority stories they'll tackle in that sprint. Teams now discuss the requirements and functionality that each user story requires. Once agreed upon, these requirements are added to the story and broken further down into the technical tasks that are needed to build the story. And right here are the requirements. Often, use cases are used in addition to or in the place of requirements. So, a user story is done, that is built and complete, when that persona, Max, can capture their desired value. We find out whether that is possible once the product module for this iteration is released and the user acceptance results are discussed in the sprint review. Here, the team demonstrates the work from the iteration. If the participants in the sprint review meeting agree that a user story is done, it is archived. If they agree that it is not yet done, it goes into one of the upcoming sprints. As you can see though, in Agile, requirements are always only technical. What we have as project requirements in Waterfall is here taken care of by the very strict iteration process. And that describes the most important differences in scope management between Waterfall and Agile project methodologies. Now that we have seen what product management looks like in Agile, let's flip back to Waterfall. The project charter, of course, guides what you need to build, and its short scope statement requires technical elaboration. That's why for the scope statement, we use context diagrams and use cases in order to explain project scope. The deliverable structure chart that we're seeing here outlines all the work products that we have to deliver with a project. You're seeing here in the yellow rectangle the major project phases. Each of these phases contains at least 2, if not many more project documents that the project manager is responsible for. As soon as we get to the execution and monitoring and controlling phase, the SDLC is in full force, with its own structure of analysis, design, build, test, and implementation. To make it through this sub-process, another set of deliverables is required. All of these would be in the white boxes here. These include, for example, design, detailed design, test scripts, implementation plan, and many, many more. Our scope statement also includes a number of important early design diagrams. The first of these diagrams is the data flow diagram. When building such a data flow diagram, always remember to put the system you're building into the circle in the middle. Any systems that you are not building, but that are important because they eventually interact with your system, are mentioned in rectangles. These rectangles are connected to the circle or to other rectangles with one-directional arrows that show how the data is supposed to flow. These DFDs can also be used in Agile contexts when breaking down a user story. The second really important diagram type, of which we will find one or preferably many in the scope statement, is the use case diagram. A use case diagram consists of actors and actions. The actors, no matter whether male, female, or non-human entities such as connected database systems like the ERP system right here, etc., are modeled as stick figures. The system we are building is a huge rectangle. The actions that a user needs to complete when interacting with our systems are in ovals. These ovals are inside of the rectangle of the system, and they're connected with the actor who performs the action. Note that all the actions always start with a verb. In a waterfall project lifecycle in which we nail down the product and project scope in a large set of requirements, even before we have begun designing our solution, that is where we need to keep changes to our project scope tightly under control. We do this by making changes to what we are building only by completing a change request form for each desired change to the requirements. That includes addition to or deletion from the requirements catalog, modification of requirements, and so on. The desired change goes at the top of the form, followed by an impact analysis right here. And then an evaluation of technical alternatives that can be used to build and implement the changed functionality. This analysis is especially important because changing scope can mean adding to the budget that the project may need. It can also mean pushing the project's end date out or bringing it in. At any rate, the functionality that is being evaluated for inclusion into the project can only be worked on if the change request is approved. If the change request is denied, well, then it may need to be revised or resubmitted, or perhaps rescheduled into a future release.
At this point, you should be able to describe the difference between requirement and a user story, and the difference between the ways in which waterfall and agile methodologies develop and manage project scope. This includes explaining how the project change request process exists to avoid scope creep in waterfall projects, and how project change requests are not needed in agile contexts. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in a future video.